Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick, Joe Saward, and I had about the 2026 Chinese and Japanese Grand Prix. Kimi Antonelli is 19 years old and leads the Formula One World Drivers' Championship. That is the story, until Ollie Bearman hit the wall at 50G. The drivers had warned the FIA on Friday, and what the three of us had to say about what these regulations are creating and what the sport cannot afford to get wrong is not what any of us planned to spend this episode on. But before we get to our conversation, I need to ask, can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Gentlemen, it is the end of March. We have had 2 races that we need to cover today, the Chinese and the Japanese Grand Prix. And I think that I want to start with race highlights. Do either one of you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
I'm going to let you go first.
Oh, you guys are such gentlemen. I would say the Chinese Grand Prix for me was Kimi's win, and specifically for me, the reaction from the fans, the paddock, even from Toto. I said this in my race notes that I saw a comment online that really struck with me, and the person wrote, "Kimi, you made us all cry, happy tears." And that's exactly what it was for me. It wasn't just because of the result, it was really about how he handled this last season and entered into this new season and what it means about the sport going forward. So that was my highlight for the Chinese Grand Prix. What about you?
I'm entirely with you on that. I'm a huge Kimi fan. Known him for quite a long time, and I have to say that he is just a delightful character. I don't think he's ever going to change. I hope he doesn't. And he's just a happy-go-lucky kid. He's a good racing driver, and he knows it. And he's just got everything under control. But he hasn't, he's not become hardened or cynical, whatever. He's just a full of joy and happiness, really. So, and he's a kid. He is 18 years old. I mean, it's ridiculous. When I was 18-year-old, the things I did when I was 18, I couldn't, even considered being as grown up as him. I was mad. I was a complete fruitcake. So.
Dick, what about you?
Well, I think I echo everybody's sentiments. Of course, I don't know Kimi, but I like what I see. I've enjoyed his interviews. I think for me, not only was it a breakthrough win, but it also, I think, 2 things that I took away from that. One, it's clearly been a confidence booster now that we've had the hindsight of Japan. It's sort of like, yep, I know not only am I a winner, I know how to win. It's almost like, one of those kind of deals. But the other part that I just loved was when Kimi won in China, the obvious joy that Toto had on his face. I couldn't decide if it was the proud dad or the delighted uncle. I'm not sure. It may have been a little bit of a mixture of the 2. But you could tell that he was clearly thrilled for this.
I think there was an element of relief in it too, to be honest.
Oh, you think? I can see that.
Massive risk with Kimi. And last year it was pretty good, but that was the sort of underlining this is the boy for the future. And I think for Toto that was a big sort of phew moment.
Oh yeah.
And I think that it's also confirmation that young driver program they have is doing it right. They got Kimi when he was, he was 12 or 11 or something. And they've literally brought him up. So that's really important. I mean, they don't all make it through, but at the moment there's a bit of a gap before the next one, obviously, because they have plenty of drivers in Formula One already. But there are some more kids coming, ages 11, 12, and so on, who may be very good. Everybody else is copying that program now, to be fair. Or not copying the program necessarily. Let's rephrase that. some of them have been doing the same sort of thing, but not in quite the same way. And Mercedes have done it really well. And so we should salute that.
So do you think that it's really interesting because, Red Bull's had their junior program for a long time as well, right? And yet it seems obvious to me that culturally, the Mercedes program seems to be the better culture, that it's maybe a bit more nurturing, and that may be just because
It's very supportive.
Mm.
And if they have a bad time, they have a bad time. But so long as they respond in the correct way in the bad time, then Mercedes keep them on, and they don't. I mean, Helmut Marko was very good. He knew who was quick, but he just destroyed more drivers than he made. Whereas, I mean, the Mercedes program is run by a guy called Gwen, who's a Frenchman, and he just does a super job. And he nurtures them. He goes to the junior races to see them. He's around them all the time, and that really is very important. And he is, he's responsible for Esteban Ocon, George Russell, Kimi Antonelli. That's not a bad start, is it?
That's a pretty good start. Yeah, it's while you were describing that, Joe, I thought about the fact that, it's really easy when things are going well, but it's how you respond when things don't go well that really describe what your character's about. And so Gwen being there for the good times and the bad times probably gave him a really good idea about those three drivers.
Well, I would chime in and say that actually it's something that I wanted to talk about when we got to Kimi, but we can definitely talk about it here, is that I think that the development process in what you just noted are so very different, and that philosophy, and we're seeing the actual results of the resilience and ability to endure what we all know is the ups and downs of racing, that when you do that and treat your driver, you're setting them up for how they're going to respond in the future and how they're going to ride those waves and or troughs that come. And I think that that's what we're seeing in that result in Kimi. Of last year had so many moments where there was so much pressure and we were all very concerned to see how he was going to handle it. And I think wisely, Mercedes realized that something was not optimizing him and that they needed to protect him a bit more than what they maybe expected the transition would be like for him. And I think that that's what we're seeing now, like allowing him that breathing room towards the end of the year has now given him the ability to really shine. I mean, that's the thing that I also thought was kind of remarkable, is from experienced veterans to even rookies, they're all in this equal field of having to adapt quite dramatically. And what could have been something that Kimi could have really gone down, he instead is actually rising. That just shows not only the talent, but also the way that he is, as you said, been raised in this process to be able to actually thrive right now, at least in these first few races. Joe?
I can't remember if I've told this story or not, but a couple of years ago I was talking to Toto, and Toto was having a sort of wobble about whether Kimi was ready or not. And I said, Toto, he's ready. He goes, how can you say that? How do you know he's ready? And I said, because I asked him, are you ready? And he said, I'm not sure. And I said, if a 17-year-old says, I'm not sure, he is, he's smart enough to realize, because most 17-year-olds say, sure I am. Of course I can do it. But Kimi is smart enough to know that. And I said, he's ready. Do it. And yeah, I know it really did. The discussion was actually whether Kimi could have a year with Williams before going into Mercedes, and I think just waiting and stepping into the shoes of Lewis Hamilton was a hell of a thing to do, but it was the best choice.
So then going on to the Japanese Grand Prix, I would say for me was Oscar finally getting to do a race. And the way that he raced, I mean, talk about, again, a different experience about resilience. I would say is him spinning out in Australia and then having the reliability failures in China. to have a very clean weekend and qualified at P3 and then swept out, like in that turn one. I really wasn't expecting that, to be honest. Maybe you guys were, but that was so exciting to see. And then he really did that battle with George. And and I thought his quip at the end of Cool Down when he said, "Well, when we finish these things, we're pretty good," I thought was another classic Oscar statement. So I come away from that race thinking, wow, if the first two races we had seen him be able to race, where would he be? I will look back at the race for a positive highlight, which I think will be going into some of the things out of the Japanese Grand Prix that might have been a highlight, not for a good reason. But for me, that was Oscar. What about you guys?
Um, I I I think Oscar is one of the coolest dudes you'll ever meet. Nothing. You could blow him up with dynamite, and his hair wouldn't be out of place afterwards. That's Oscar. He's just cool, calm, collected, and he bounces back from anything. Um, so I wasn't in the least bit surprised. But the thing that surprised me was that the McLaren was actually quite competitive, which it hadn't been up to now, and that tells you a little bit about things. These cars are going to be very track specific this year. Certain tracks, certain cars do well. Certain tracks, they're not going to do well. So that's my guess. We've only seen 3 tracks, all a bit different, and we've seen different people, more or less, because Ferrari weren't really in it in Japan. And so, I mean, they were there, but not really challenging seriously for the win. And the other one is, of course, it was great for Kimi, but he was lucky. He was very lucky. The safety car came out and literally handed it to him on a plate. Now, I'm not sure if he could have come back without the safety car. He would have. He was working his way forwards, and I think he had a better. I think he had a better package than George did. But if George had been ahead, I suspect that the team would have said, "Kimi, don't worry about it. Let's not cause too much trouble, because you don't want George being too upset by Kimi beating him all the time." That's the other thing. But George is going to have to learn how to handle that, and he had some problems. But anyway, nonetheless, Kimi leads the World Championship, the youngest man ever to lead the World Championship. And did you know he's the first Italian to lead the World Championship since 1953?
Really?
Yep. I think the last Italian to lead the World Championship was Alberto Ascari.
Well, that was going to be my guess, but wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's an astonishing fact. So,
Huh. For me, while it was good to see McLaren at least competitive in Suzuka and finishing a race, I think for me the big news was just that huge crash by Ollie. And of course we were talking about this before we started recording, but man, a 50G impact into what is really what anybody would consider to be a soft barrier. It's not like hitting a concrete wall that you might find at Baku or Monaco. Just kind of gives you an idea of just how massive that impact was. It's a big testimony to the cars of how strong they are, that he got away with, some contusions on his knee, one of his knees. And but I worry about something like this happening on a street circuit where there is no runoff and the barriers are quite a bit harder.
and I sort of said it before, racing drivers are one thing, and we don't want to see any of them get hurt. But what the sport can't afford to do ever, particularly not in the modern age as it is today, is to hurt any spectators. And if we have cars going wheel over wheel, and we saw in the Porsche race in Suzuka, a car getting airborne, rolling, going over the top of, this is a Porsche. It's not, the power levels are very much lower than Formula One, going over the top of the regulation-sized debris fencing. And one can only imagine what would happen if 2 Formula One cars got together like that. So we can't afford that to happen. The regulations have created this problem, and the FIA needs to fix it because it's dangerous. and it's dangerous. And I think everyone's beginning to get onto that now. There was an incident in Melbourne when Franco Colapinto just missed the back of Liam Lawson at the start, which was very dangerous too. But this was high speed, super dangerous, and you can't afford to give these kind of things. You're only going to get so many chances before it goes wrong, and if it goes wrong, you're into Gilles Villeneuve territory, and you don't want to be there.
Well, I was just going to say the very thing that is creating all this passing back and forth is also the very same thing that created the huge crash that Ollie had. And I dare say probably some other near misses that we're just not aware of. And so they've got to do, I'm with Joe. I mean, the FIA has got to do something sooner rather than later, or it's a problem.
Can you expand on that, Dick?
Well, I think, the whole thing that's happening here is that we're seeing a whole lot of passing because, you have 2 cars going down a straightaway and suddenly one car has 300 horsepower less because they've run out of electricity. And so the other car goes by quite easily. Well, that has created some, I'm going to use the word exciting. I use that in air quotes, racing. And certainly in some cases, like, Charles Leclerc going into turn 1 and passing people on the outside in the marbles, that was genuinely exciting, okay? Don't get me wrong. But the other part of me is, like, we saw it with the accident where Colapinto basically had his car suddenly go down a gear, and because he was having to harvest electricity, and here comes Ollie 30, 40, 50 kilometers faster all of a sudden, and just the road happened to go in the wrong direction at just the right time, and here's Ollie dropping wheels off in the dirt, and next thing you know, he's the passenger, and, at a very high speed, and I suspect that there's been other situations where somebody all of a sudden started harvesting, and the guy right behind was like, "Oh my goodness," and took evasive action and missed him, and maybe we saw him and didn't really register what was happening, or maybe we didn't see it, but, I suspect this is the first time we've had an accident, but there has been a bunch of near accidents already, and people are just not talking about it. That's just a guess.
Okay, so here's what I'm hearing you say as the non-racer, is that in racing, if we hear this term by the commentary or sometimes stewards' decisions, moving under braking, that is seen as an intentional act by the racer, hence the penalty, right? Like, but what you're pointing to is the technical driving that is required is causing a situation where the car and the driver are essentially the same result, meaning the car is suddenly slowed. The driver behind them is having to react. The differential in speed is causing or an increased likelihood of what we saw happening to Ollie and this evasive action, and then all of the consequences that could result from that. And that we would normally penalize that if it was intentional. And then this is coming from a technical as a result of the regulations. Regardless, the reason for the penalty is the safety that results from it. Am I seeing this correctly?
Yeah, I'd say that that's fair, and I mean, there was an instance, I can't remember, it was at Suzuka, it might have been in qualifying, might have been in the race, but we saw it on George Russell's, onboard camera. He's going down a straightaway and everything's going great, and then all of a sudden, you can just hear the car slow down. I mean, just boom, I mean, it just started happening because he ran out of energy, and, as a driver, if you're just the way a driver's wired, that's gotta be incredibly frustrating, but it's also really dangerous. But it's also what's creating the artificial passing that we're having.
Well, and so that's what I guess that's one of the things that I've been wanting to understand better is that it seems like so much of what the regulations is asking right now is counter to what the racers have been developing skillcraft wise, everything leading up to getting up to Formula One. Like this idea of what you should or should not do, what is appropriate is not. And the implication is in this case, safety because the way that we want proper racing is to be within the confines of racing itself. I guess as a racer, that's what I really would, I want to unpack your brain a little bit on that. Like, is that valid the way that I'm seeing it?
I'd like to leap in here and say a couple of things. One is that these are supposed to be the best racing drivers in the world, and they cope with whatever they're given. Now, the fact that sometimes they had to cope with really brutal stuff in the past, it happened. In the super turbocharging era in the 80s, they had to deal with ridiculous turbo lags and sudden bursts of huge power, and they dealt with it. Now, the difference now is the fact that it's not just one car, it's two cars. Because in the case of Ollie, the accident, you had Colapinto slowing down suddenly and Bearman speeding up suddenly, because he'd got the power boost on to try to overtake Franco, and Franco, the car had gone into recuperation of electricity mode, and those two things combined to catch Ollie out. It wasn't Franco's fault. He didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
It just happened because the two cars did two different things. So there's a difference. I mean, they should be able to cope with most things. And I think in a while, when they develop the cars more, if they keep the rules as they are, and I'm not sure necessarily that they should because of the safety factor. But I think on the other hand, at the beginning of any new formula, there's lots of whinging and whining. And in 2014, there was a lot of whinging and whining about how this wasn't Formula One and all the rest of it. And the guys who were quick before weren't happy afterwards. Say, the Max Landau syndrome, we hate this thing. Whereas people who have got better cars, they like it, So that's all pretty normal stuff. But, the one thing that alarms me is the safety angle. I don't think the element of the impact on the competition is that great a business. I just think it's a safety problem.
I guess I struggle with that because listening to F1 TV, Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve both came in during their post-race show. And towards the tail end, I think it was like 30 minutes in, they both were discussing as champions of racing in previous eras. They said the level of complexity right now under these regulations and the type of cars that are being driven, they're like, this is not what we could have driven. I think Damon Hill said it's like patting your head, rubbing your stomach, doing a math problem, juggling all of this. And like he had three other things. He said the level of intellectual capacity that is being asked of these drivers right now is unlike anything that we've ever seen. And so when you add in that level of they're still humans. I'm not questioning their capacity to be able to do and excel. I think what I'm questioning is their capacity to do all that we're asking them to do and to go against what they have trained all these years to do. And be like the type of driving, like the instinct that we saw of who was it that in Australia that evaded Franco's car? Wasn't it
Ollie? Franco evading Liam Lawson.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like that level of is not just simply did not happen. Franco developed that skill over years of racing. And so that's just one moment, one snapshot of that instinct that's been developed. I'm saying is there's so much that they have honed in themselves as human beings to do. And now if the regulations are asking them to do something counter to that, aren't we increasing the safety concerns? Are we asking for possible problems later down the road that we have not? This was the most recent example and pretty large without nearly the grave consequences that we've already said could be. It's a disconnect to me. I don't have any question of their skill and at the pinnacle of the racing. I'm saying is where is that convergence possibly happening that puts us into a much difficult situation unnecessarily? Like adjust the rules.
I think that 6 months from now, when they develop the power units a little bit more, these problems will be improved upon. So is it right to panic and change the regulations now? I mean, they are overly complex and nobody was prepared for them. All of that I agree with, but it's a really difficult balance. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, the complications written into the regulations are daft, and they could have solved this problem 6 months ago just by saying, well, we'll go to 60-40, not 50-50, you know.
Mhm.
But they didn't want to do that. That was, the FIA
And I
saying
guess
no.
that's my point. I guess that's my point in frustration is that if we knew this 6 months ago, if we knew that there were simple fixes, why are we delaying? Why are we not addressing that?
Because
Does
the
it make
FIA
sense?
didn't want to back down.
Yeah, and I think that's wrong. I think that they I know you're not a spokesperson for the FIA by any form or fashion. But this is my frustration watching this. 6 more months, where does that put us? How many more races? Like, so going back to what one of you said about interesting, I mean, that was another conversation that was had in the post-race show between Damon and Jacques. Like, I think it was Damon who said it's interesting and tactical. Jacques said it was interesting, not exciting. And I agree with that. I mean, and I think I said this in my race notes. I'm frustrated that when we're watching a race, all of a sudden the commentary gets super loud and excited when they see an overtake. And I'm thinking, why are you shouting right now? This is nothing. It's provisional. It is not decisive anymore. It's taken some of the enthusiasm. But if you calm yourself down and wait and see, oh, okay, maybe that person overtakes. Are they going to be passed and re-overtaken themselves? It's a different way of looking at the racing right now. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying it's different. And it's not what I'm accustomed to. I don't know that I'm skeptical, but I'm open. But if I think I would maintain more openness if the crash with Ollie hadn't happened. And when I think of the safety concerns, I just go, is it really, are we really getting what we're asking for? High quality, exciting racing without putting either drivers or the spectators at risk? I don't have a clear answer on that.
I think if you followed what happened at the start of the race, Kimi Antonelli down in sixth place from pole position. He gets jumped by everybody, and then you watched him as he came back up again, and that was good racing. He was pushing it. He was closing in. He was trying. He wasn't taking crazy risks, and he did it once, missed, came back, tried again, and got through, and that was good stuff, and there was nothing wrong with that. Now, that's what they're supposed to do, but in certain circumstances, and we saw it with the Bearman accident, the way that the system works is dangerous. And so we have to find a balance between having good racing, because, we say, you hear somebody shrieking about overtaking. It's better than having no overtaking.
Yeah.
You go back a few years and there was no overtaking because of the regulations and everyone complained about no overtaking. So, we got to find the right balance, but the ultimately important thing always has to be safety, because you can't afford to kill people anymore. It's just not acceptable. In the old days, it was like sort of, yeah, okay, that happens. That was the attitude. But you certainly can't afford to kill anybody who's there to watch. I mean, that's just madness. So they have to do something, and they have to do something quickly. What they do, I don't know, but it involves the FIA, and that's their job. Their job is to make the regulations and make it safe. So they need to get on with it.
Yep.
Dick, you have any other final thoughts before we move on to doing a team by team?
Well, speaking as the curmudgeon racer that I am, I actually went and sat down and on YouTube I watched a karting race over the weekend that was in the afternoon out of Arizona, And I was watching these little 9 and 10-year-old kids just going at each other, hammer and tongs. There was 30 of them. You know, it was just joyful to watch these little guys just get after it. And about midway through the final race, I thought to myself, "Oh, there's no super clipping going on here." So and so I that probably shows way too much jaded cynicism in my tiny little brain, but, it was fun watching the future there's gonna be a future star in there somewhere probably, and it was fun to watch them just getting after it, and they were racing their little hearts out, and so, but you also know that the guys in Suzuka were racing their hearts out too. It's just they had a whole lot more to deal with. So, anyway, that's my final parting shot.
Very good point. Very good point. So as we move on to just looking at the team by team, I think we've already talked about Kimi when it comes to Mercedes. I would like to explore a little bit about George, and especially I think the most recent being Japan, how that race talk about Kimi being lucky, George being on the other side of it. What are y'all's thoughts about that?
Oh, well, George was absolutely unlucky. He couldn't be worse. He pitted and then the safety car came out. It doesn't get any worse than that. Um, and as a result of that, he dropped down the order and he fought his way back up as far as he could do it. But by then, Kimi was gone. So, could George have held off Kimi? We don't know. You can't say. But I think he was just unlucky. Toto said it on the radio, if I remember correctly. He said, "Super unlucky, George." And that's the truth of it. Sometimes the luck falls with you, sometimes it doesn't,
Yep.
and it's just the way of the world. And, it's the way, a little bit, going on to Oscar, he's been unlucky, in the first 2 races. And now it's all come together. Whereas Lando's often lucky, and he hasn't been lucky recently,
Yep.
One of the great Bernie Eccleston always had this belief that you should always hire lucky racing drivers because, what's the point in hiring an unlucky one? Because there's something always goes wrong for them. And so if you have his view was, if you have an unlucky driver, fire him and get a lucky one. But then having said that, he employed Riccardo Patrese for a long time, who was always very unlucky. So, maybe that's just Bernie being Bernie. But, there is kind of some logic in that sort of only hire the lucky ones.
Dick, what are your thoughts as a racer watching what happened to George?
I mean, George, under all circumstances, yeah, I mean, the safety car couldn't have come at a worse time. Obviously, really bad luck. I thought he raced really, really well to get back to where he was. He was clearly disappointed after the race, the interview that I saw, but I also think that George has been around long enough to know that over the course of a long season, sometimes he will be the unlucky one and sometimes he'll be the lucky one, you know? Now, having said that, I have seen some drivers who seem to spend the whole year with the cartoon anvil hanging over their head, the Looney Tunes anvil that just drops out of the sky unexpectedly. And there are guys that have seasons like that, and you see it. But generally speaking, if you have bad luck at a race or two at the beginning of the year, you'll probably wind up having good luck at a race or two later on in the season. It all seems to kind of balance out. And Kimmy will probably get screwed by a safety car at some stage, you know? So that's kind of it. It's a long season, and so uh, George is gonna feel bad right now, but he'll be feeling good sooner or later.
Looking at the 2 races consecutively, right? China and now Japan. As a racer, is there a level of awareness? I don't want to say anxiety, but like radar is up when your teammate has now performed really well, is getting the spotlight. You've been the one that's been bedded into that team, worked aggressively to show your value. Does that start to mess with your head?
I have multiple thoughts. First of all, George was Lewis Hamilton's teammate for a bunch of years and pushed him, right? And in some cases wound up in the ground effect era doing a better job because Lewis just didn't get on with the ground effect cars that well. He still won races, but, I think George performed very admirably against Lewis. I guess that's the best way to put it. Now the tables are turned, and the young guy, he's no longer the young guy. Lewis had been the old guy and he was the young guy. Now the tables are turned, and here's this young guy who's coming in and pushing him for all he's worth. And we see this repeated again and again and again in Formula One, where, you have the young hotshot who then becomes the wily veteran who then gets the young hotshot that he's got to deal with, and it's like this never ending cycle. And so George is living that just a little bit. And I think, for this season, because of experience and all that kind of stuff, you have to give a tip of the hat, I think, towards George, in my mind anyway, that over the course of a long season, it's going to level out, and that experience is going to trump the youth and exuberance of Kimi. But in 2027, I don't know. I would say probably not, but it might, and so it ought to be a fascinating, an absolutely fascinating season to watch how those two get along.
Yeah, because I guess the distinction was first two races, right? George had an excellent time in Australia, and then he was right there with Kimi on China, and he seemed very cordial and like, oh, it's wonderful. But then now you have this race, and it was truly out of, I agree with both of you, out of his control. So, but when you start stacking that, I don't think he's hitting the panic button. I agree with you. Experience tells him to stay steady, but it's got to be in that calculation of, I can't have too many more weeks like this. I don't want a bunch of anvils coming at me. I do think the interplay of team dynamic is an interesting thing, which leads me to the next team, which be Ferrari, and specifically George's old teammate, and the dynamic between him and Charles. Joe, I wondered, like, what is your sense of that dynamic, and or like even just the general strategy picture? Is it improving over at Ferrari in your opinion, or have the circumstances not yet forced really any kind of like high stakes decision when it comes to their strategy calls?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, between the drivers, I think you can see the way they race. There's massive respect between them. And they're really going for it. And I think they touched in Japan even. In fact, they probably touched in China as well. I think about it, but they're going for it, and they respect one another, and there's no dirty business. Now, beyond that, have Ferrari had any bad strategy calls? Yes, there've been a couple. Well, there was one in China that wasn't great, but we haven't really seen enough this year. The car's not good enough to be fully competitive with the Merc in racing. It can qualify well, particularly, Charles is a demon qualifier. Lewis is no slouch either, but
No, right.
and they have this fantastic start because they have the smaller turbo. And so they can be in play early on in the races, but they're just fading away. So I think they need to fix that, and then we can start to see if if Ferrari's improving or not, to be honest. I think that how far off are they compared to last year? About the same, probably.
That's really good. Actually want to take something you just said, Dick. I want to ask you about it. The turbo and this fading away. I think that was such a good point that you just made, Joe. And I don't know that many of us who are not racers would understand the significance of what you just said, which getting that start line and the early part of the race, getting that behind them, but the actual endurance aspect of the race. Dick, I wondered your thoughts about that. And when you look at the car itself, and like it seems like they have a straight line deficit. And is that your take as well? Like, and do you see them being able to adjust in those technical aspects of their car?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a bit of a straight line deficit. I don't know, and I'd be interested to hear what Joe thinks about this too, but I don't think that the Ferrari is as easy on the tires as what we might see with, say, the Mercedes, which seems to be very gentle, I use that word, there's nothing gentle about a Formula One car on tires, but the Mercedes uses up their tires at a less rapid rate. Maybe that's the best way to put it. And you see it when Ferrari has been like neck and neck with Mercedes early in the race. And I'm thinking about Australia and China. After a while, they would start to fade just a little bit. And I think that was tires more than anything else. The Mercedes was still moving on. They hadn't lost a lot of their grip, whereas the Ferrari was starting to go off, and maybe their balance wasn't quite good enough or whatever. But that's what seemed to allow Mercedes to start pulling a gap on the Ferrari. So yeah, straight line speed is always a good thing, but I think also that tire wear may be a part of it too.
Joe, do you have thoughts on what Dick just said?
No, I think that's all fairly sensible assessment. I think I just think that, well, they know they're behind. They know they've got to do some work on the engine. They are much more positive about the chassis. Lewis is positive about driving the cars. Charles is obviously enjoying racing them, because they're lighter and they're, they're smaller and lighter, and they are easier, more maneuverable, I suppose, is the best way of putting it. They're not that much lighter, but they are they are smaller.
Yeah.
And when you say that, Joe, you're meaning because their turbo is smaller, that's impacting the overall weight and like how they're
No,
distributed.
no. It's just, I'm just talking about the car as a whole. That the starts are impacted by the smaller turbo. But having said that, the smaller turbo may work against them later in the races. When you want to have brute power as opposed to easily adaptable power, that's the difference. So, that could be it could be one of the elements involved, of having this great ability to start from fifth and end up in the lead. But then later on there, maybe that works against you. So they need to go down and go through all the data and figure it all out and work out what to do with it. But at the end of the day, I think one of the key elements is they need more grunt, as we say. They just need more power.
That's good. That's good to know. Okay, let's move on to McLaren. We talked about Oscar, but I want to actually say two things. One is that McLaren themselves seems to acknowledge that the freshly repaved surface at Suzuka really masked their front graining and that they see as a weakness. So I wondered if you guys had any thoughts about that. And also just like the underlying car seems to have real potential. I think you said that earlier, Joe, like watching Oscar, that was a takeaway. And what you both think about where McLaren can go from here.
Well, I think McLaren they made a bit of a fuss so far this year about how they didn't have the latest version of the Mercedes engine in testing, and they're catching up. And maybe that's what's happening. They did say in Japan that a lot of the improvement have been coming from working with HPP, the Mercedes engine building firm. And so maybe they just had a little bit more time to get things sorted out. And so they should be good because they've been good in the last few years. And while it's a big change, McLaren knows how to build racing cars and they've got good people. So you would expect them to be there or thereabouts. So, if they have the same engine as Mercedes, they should be nearly as good as Mercedes.
Yeah, I agree with Joe. I think I also think that it's almost like, and I may be wrong here, and I'm okay with being wrong. It's like Oscar took the lessons learned and the disappointment of the 2025 season, and I think he's applying it towards 2026, whereas I think Lando is having to still recharge his mental batteries to get the best out of himself, and I don't know that he's there yet. It's like he put everything into his, heart and soul into winning that championship last year, and I think he's having a little bit of a letdown or a hangover, if you will, um, from 2025 now getting into 2026. I don't know, but that's just, he's I don't know. It's just the sense that I get, and I could be completely off base, but you do see that with other athletes. We certainly have seen that here in Dallas with a number of our sports franchises where, you have 1 or 2 guys that carry them all the way to the championship, and then the following season, their performance just isn't that great, and it's because they just spent themselves winning that one championship. I don't know, that's just kind of my read. I mean, somebody like a Max, he didn't care. He's, he's just gonna go because he's just that personality, but I think there's other folks, and I think Lando would follow into this category. I think he's trying to find his feet now, um, as the new season starts. I don't know. I may be completely off base, but that's kind of my read.
Well, I appreciate you bringing him up because, if anything, that's one thing that I noted that, as the reigning world champion, it doesn't seem like in much of the commentary that I've read, it just seems he hasn't been a talking point, which has to be hard on him. And then that made me ask the question of where is his head right now. But I do think there's something to be said about the short winter break, all that he had to put in over the course of last year, let alone we know that it wasn't something that it was just a blowout type of year for him
Mhm.
last year. It was
Sure.
something where there were peaks and troughs, and I just wonder if this is a trough leading to a peak for him.
Mhm.
It just might be a different timeline in comparison to someone like Oscar or some of the others. Joe, I wonder your thoughts.
If you look at um, Lando's career, quite often he's been slow starting at the beginning of the season. And why that is, I don't know. He might say, no, that's not true. But I kind of get the feeling that he needs to sort of warm up a little bit. And maybe that's where we're at. So,
Mhm.
and you're right about Max. Max just gets in and drives it until the wheels fall off, and it doesn't matter when it is. But Lando is much more sort of, I don't want to use the word delicate, but, Lando has lots of sort of self doubt, and um, things get to him more than to other drivers. Then he fights his way through it, and comes out ahead or whatever. But he's much more human, if you like, um,
Yes.
than some of the others. But is that a good thing? Probably not.
It's interesting, Joe. I don't know if I've ever shared this story with you, but a friend of mine here in Dallas was Lando's tuner when Lando was a karter and won the junior world karting championship. And they've stayed friends since then. And he shared with me a voicemail that Lando left for my friend's daughter, who was very upset that Lando was not able to come through Dallas on his way down to Coda for the US Grand Prix. And it was the kindest, almost like Big Brother kind of voicemail. And I thought to myself, I didn't really have much of an opinion one way or another about Lando, but I heard that voicemail and I heard the genuine warmth in his voice towards this little girl and completely changed it. And I was like, this is a genuinely good guy. And and to your point, he is. He's very human and a very good person from what I can tell. And and so I think it's pretty interesting that you would say that because um there's a lot of race drivers that have a real edge to them. They're not necessarily nice guys, you know? And so, yeah, Lando probably does need a warm-up period, you know?
And I think that that's admirable to be able to achieve the
Yeah.
success that he has and maintain that softness in an environment that probably um, you are a little bit different and or everyone is expected to be so hard and to maintain
Yep.
that. That's good.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on to Haas. I know we've already talked about Ollie and everything that happened in Japan. Actually, I just want to look at Esteban specifically. He had points within reach in China and then he made an error by his own admission. He's sitting at I think a 17-point deficit to his teammate after 2 weekends. That's got to be a difficult place to be. Talk about your mental health and like where you're at. One bad race is not like a verdict, but I'm just looking at it and wondering how is that for him? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? I hadn't really considered that. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Joe.
I do. I do. Esteban's the toughest guy you'll meet. He makes Oscar Piastri look like a weakling. You can beat him over the head with baseball bats and bury him under rock, and he will find a way out. So he's not happy. He knows that Ollie's a really good driver, but Esteban's a really good driver too. So but never ever ever think that Esteban is going to start getting weak in the head or anything like that. It's just not going to happen, because the way he got to Formula One, the way he climbed the ladder, is unlike anybody else. I mean, literally, the family sold the house and were living in a caravan, and they were taking the tires out of the rubbish bins that other people had, thrown them away at karting events. So he can deal with pretty much anything.
That scrappiness, Dick, you know that from many people. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I just love that description, Joe, because I've known a number of guys who are doing the same thing with going in and finding tires and pulling them out of the dumpster, as we would call it here in the States, and mounting them up and going. And yeah, I love that. I love that. And those guys that come up that hard scrabble way, it's pretty tough to get in their head.
Okay. Well, so then let's move on to Alpine and Pierre. He's scored in every race this season, and I really have been impressed by him in these 3 races, and just his resilience. I feel like his patience and sticking with the team has been rewarded, and I mean, I think Alpine's doing better than I expected them to do, but I wondered what your thoughts were. Dick, I'll let you go first.
I had been wondering at the end of last season if really a lot of the struggles that Alpine was having was simply because they had an engine that, was down on power because Renault was already pulling out. And so I don't think they had the most competitive power package. And sure, they had chassis issues, but, with them taking on that Mercedes engine, how is it going to look for this year? And you know what? They've produced a pretty good car. And then, admittedly, they put a lot of their development money from last year onto this year's car. And I think, obviously if they're not at the top of the midfield, they're nipping at the heels of, say, a Haas or somebody like that. So, I think they've done a really good job. I don't know that I'm that surprised by the performance that Gasly's been putting in, because I think he's been seriously solid for a number of seasons now. He's never had quite the car to show it, but I think that guy is probably pretty special.
Yeah. I mean, I actually thought it was interesting watching Max in the Red Bull that is not sitting at the top of the field doing battle with the Pierre in the Alpine, and to watch 2 guys who I think are very talented and in not the best cars really aggressively. This is at Suzuka. Uh,
Yeah.
You're
Going at
having
each
good
other.
racing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
interesting to me. But Joe, I wonder, what are your thoughts about Alpine, like where they stand in the development race or any of the dynamics that we've already talked about?
Well, there's a number of different things. One is Pierre is an exceptional driver, no question about it. One of the most exceptional things is he survived Red Bull basically culling him, and he wasn't destroyed by that. He just said, "Okay, I'm going to go off and I'm going to prove them wrong," which he's now doing.
Mm.
So he's clearly got a lot of talent, and he's got a lot of self-belief. Now, the team is weak. It's weak because of the damage that was done to it over time by some appalling management decisions from Renault, just changing people all the time and just messing the whole thing up. And so there's a lot of rebuilding work to be done, and that is still in process. So it is inevitable that they will not have as good a car as the other Mercedes users. In fact, they've done better than Williams, which surprised me a little bit, but there's other reasons for that. But they're not up there yet. And Colapinto is okay. I mean, you've got to feel a little bit sorry for the guy. Everyone's forgotten that Colapinto, although he's in his third season of Formula One, he's never done the first half of the season before. And so he's
Yeah.
going to racetracks he's never been to before. Although, it's kind of weird. And I think that continues until Monaco. I think after Monaco, he'll have been to all the tracks before. So then we can see if he's actually getting better or not. There are signs that he's a talented guy, but I think he was made to look rather good early on at Williams, and then not so good after that. So we'll see. We've got to give him some more time. But he really needs to, by the end of this year, he needs to be much closer to Pierre. That's for sure.
Okay, so let's move on to Red Bull. Joe, I wonder if you actually noted this in your JSBM this week. What are your thoughts about Max barring a journalist from the press conference?
To be honest, knowing everybody involved in that, Max told Fireplay Television that it wasn't the question he objected to, it was the manner in which it had been asked, which was, in other words, that this guy was laughing at him when he asked the question in Abu Dhabi last year, and Max obviously took offense. Max is not an idiot. Max doesn't do crazy stuff. So if he feels aggrieved about something, there's probably a reason he is aggrieved about something. Now, is it right to say to the guy he's got to go? No, it's not. It's not one of Max's finest moments. But it is, when people do things to you that you don't like, you often, human beings, it's in all of our natures, we want revenge. We want to do something back to them to say, oi, you. And, it's to do, there's a million reasons why revenge exists, but I fully understand revenge, and I'm totally willing to use it as well, because, I think that people deserve what they get. I believe in karma, and if you do bad things to people, it will come back and bite you eventually. Now, I'm not going to pass judgment on that. I just think it wasn't the wisest thing for Max to do, but it's not. The other thing is, I guess there wasn't much going on in the paddock because all the media started shouting about it, because they didn't have much else to shout about. So, yeah, it's true. It's
Sure.
I just think it was all a bit blown out of proportion, but it wasn't smart of Max. But Max is usually very, very smart. So, but he's an unhappy bunny at the moment. Max is not happy. He's not happy with the rules. He's not happy with the car. He wants to go drive GT cars because he likes them and he's winning races. So Max is a racer through and through. I don't think he'll. I think people talk about walking away, but it's still too early for him. Even if he started very young, I think it would be unwise to do that, because as we've seen in the past, people who walk away too early want to come back later. And coming back is difficult. Kimi Räikkönen did it. Niki Lauda did it.
Fernando did it.
Hmm?
Fernando did it too.
Oh, yeah, Fernando did do it. Yeah, he was older, though, I think. I'm talking about sort of late 20s. It usually tends to happen around 30, or used to. But there is another element to that, which is that, Formula One is much more intense nowadays. There are a lot more races. It's a bigger commitment. So you can burn out more quickly.
Mhm.
On the other hand, also, you have people who are going on much longer. Their careers, we've got Fernando and Lewis, who are now into sort of, it's almost bath chair country in Formula One terms. Everyone thought that Jack Brabham was old when he got to be well into his 30s. But I mean, these guys are into their 40s now. So it's a balancing act of what. Also, it's to do with what else you have in life, and have you got all the money you want? I mean, most of them have got all the money they need. But it's also about what they want in life. Max says he's not interested in records, but I'm not entirely convinced about that, because I think everyone's really into records, secretly or otherwise. So we'll see. But I think he's just unhappy at the moment, and I think that is impacting a lot of things.
Dick, I wanted to ask you about this whole car challenge that Max is facing. My understanding is that the biggest deficit is not the power unit, but the stability through the high speed corners. And that's what's costing Max some valuable time every lap. I wonder if that's what you've understood, and like what would require like fixing that.
Well, I think they just need to be able to find more aerodynamic efficiency. It's the old deal. You can pile more downforce on, which the car apparently needs. But when you pile downforce on, then all of a sudden you increase your drag unless you come up with some clever solutions, right? And right now, Mercedes is more clever about how much downforce they're producing versus the drag that's causing. And the Red Bull isn't there yet. And I think that, from everything that I understand, that's the big chassis deficit that they've got right now. The engine seems pretty good, but it's more than anything else. It's just that they're not that balance between downforce and drag just is not there yet. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me to the next team, which is Racing Bulls, because the reason why I think that it's not the engine outside of what I've read is also looking at where Racing Bulls, also using the same engine, seems to be doing well. I think, if anything, Racing Bulls seems to be one of the teams that's actually been quietly more functional through all these races. And both of the team drivers have been doing decent. They're not at the front, but they're doing well, especially for
They're showing.
having a rookie. Yeah, they're solid. And so having a rookie as one of those, I think, is great. And then when you consider Liam rehabilitating himself and just doing a solid driving these last races, I wonder what either one of you think.
Yeah, I think the thing that people don't appreciate perhaps about Racing Bulls is they've been quietly collecting some really seriously good engineers in recent years, and they now got Tim Goss in charge. He's decades at McLaren, and he's just a very smart guy. And they have Alan Permain, the team principal, who's a very, very good racing engineer. And they've just gradually been building it up and getting better engineers, because ultimately they have to be a team that stands in their own right and not just always in the shadow of Red Bull, because at some point there's going to be a fight over multiple ownerships of Formula One teams, and Red Bull has to be prepared to sell one of the teams. Well, we know which one they're going to sell. So they're investing for the future, and they're doing a very good job. So it doesn't surprise me that the team is as close to Red Bull as it has been on occasion. It still serves the purpose of bringing on Red Bull staff, but they're also standing on their own 2 feet much more.
Dick, any thoughts on that before we move on to Williams?
No, not really. Like I said, I think that they've been doing a really solid job, and it seems like, depending on the race weekend. I mean, we've only had 3 races, of course, but it seems like one of their drivers is always out there, kind of in contention for about 7th or 8th to 10th. Pick up a few points here and there, and at this stage of the game, given how young their drivers are and all that, I think they've been doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. I said Williams, but I actually meant Audi. I wonder, Joe, what in the wake of Jonathan Wheatley's departure, what is your read on the team? And is there something more complicated going on there that we're not seeing?
No, it was just a fundamental imbalance in the team. You can't have 2 bosses reporting to the big boss. As to who was jumped, who pushed, whatever, to be honest, I don't really know. I spoke to Jonathan a while ago in Australia, and he was And he was pretty happy about things, and they were doing better than people expected them to do. And he was pretty motivated. So I'm a little surprised that, he would have just walked away from it all for personal reasons, whatever the hell that means. I tend to think it's just politics going on. And I think that probably Binotto comes from Ferrari, where they invented politics. And I'm sure he was probably in the ear of Mr. Dolner of Audi saying, you can't have this system, it doesn't work. Because you never have, having two bosses isn't the right thing. Binotto's right to that extent. But whether Binotto, now he's in charge of the whole thing, they'll find another team principal type person who will be beholden to Binotto. It's just a question of changing the organogram lines, really. But that was maybe that was necessary. Maybe it wasn't necessary. I'm not sure that the Aston Martin stories are that important in the whole thing. There might be some possibility one day that Jonathan can go there, but I don't think that's the fundamental reason for any of this.
Well, that was really good on the inside of like the politics of Audi. I have another question I want to pose to both of you. My understanding is that Audi was the driving force behind this whole 50-50 or essentially 50-50 hybrid that we're seeing under the new regulations. They wanted that as a part of their condition to enter, and that the whole premise was that they would be able to translate their knowledge from other motorsport programs. If my understanding is correct, I am trying to understand why Audi is not performing better than they are right now. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Am I correct in my understanding, and am I wrong for being confused?
It makes total sense to me because in the past, Audi has generally not competed against equal opposition. They go to a championship and they win. They go into the desert, they win because nobody's as good. They go up against Porsche and they won for a bit and then they lost in the Le Mans program. But they generally have avoided going head to head. They certainly have avoided Formula One for years. And I think there's a level of arrogance that leaps into teams or companies. Sometimes a lot of these car companies think that they're much cleverer than people in Formula One, and they are proved time and time again that they're not. And we've seen it so many times of car executives coming in making an absolute mess of things. Most recently, Alpine is a good example of that. But you can go back in the history of Formula One all the way through. There's always another car manufacturer wandering in thinking they know what they're doing. So I think that's just part of it. I'm actually quite impressed by what they've done. They've done better than I thought they would. So yeah, I don't think it's bad. I just think, we'll see how it goes. If they have got the management sorted out, they've got to get the engine sorted out, but the car's more or less there. I think the car's pretty decent. So once they get a bit more power, then we'll see.
Okay. Well, I'm mindful of the time because I know, Dick, you have a hard stop because your day job is calling. I want to move on to Williams, and specifically, a lot of people have talked about, the overweight problem of the car, and, Carlos had some really good moments over the race in the races. But I want to ask Joe, what's your read on Alex Albon after these races? Do you have any sense of the timeline that Valves has put on the upgrade? Is that even realistic right now, especially going even to the idea that we have race cancellations and that they didn't get the time like at testing in Bahrain? Wasn't it Bahrain? They missed one of the testings. Like, I'm just wondering in those two cases, how is Alex in?
Yeah, I missed all of Barcelona.
Yeah, that's it. I knew one of them.
Look, Williams had to make some compromises to get the car out in time. That's basically because they have production issues that take time to fix, which are part of the whole gradual deterioration of Williams in the latter days of the Williams family running it. They're still suffering from that. So they need to do a whole bunch of rebuilding stuff, and that impacts on the performance. So the performance is impacted by the production, which means that things come late, or you have to make compromises to get things out in time. So I think this is where we're going. Alex Albon is, apart from Esteban Ocon and Oscar Piastri, he's one of the toughest people out there too, mentally speaking. So I don't worry about Alex at all. I mean, Carlos is quick, but Alex is also quick. So, we see that they are pretty well matched, the pair of them. I think that Alex likes to complain a lot and wants the team to move faster, but they can only do what they can do. And they do need a massive weight fixing program, and they're going to have that. Clearly, they're going to have that. So they just need to keep their heads down. It might actually be helpful to them to have the month off, because they've gathered a lot of data, and they can learn from what they've got, and they've got the chance to go through, produce new parts that are lighter and better. And so I think we'll see them coming back stronger as the season goes on. I really do.
Then the last one is our Cadillac team.
Oh, you missed Aston Martin. You don't want to get
so sorry. Oh yeah, sorry. Well, I'll let you guys to say either on Cadillac or Aston Martin.
Well, Cadillac's where I expected it to be, and Aston Martin is, as we know, a major league disaster that needs fixing. So there's not much you can say. That's about it.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly. Aston Martin is an absolute shock. And clearly there's some serious, again, talking about revolving doors of management, that's part of it, right? And so I think that there's a lot of that going on at Aston Martin. Hopefully they right the ship, because I hate to see the talent of Fernando Alonso being wasted once again with a bad car. But that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay, so I want to close out by saying, if you're a new fan, I think the key thing I would take away from this conversation is that we're just in the opening chapter of the new formula. I think our conversation, especially about the regulations and the safety, I would hope you would see that we're just introducing a lot of elements that everyone is grappling with, and that it's going to continue to play out over these next 19 races that we have. And this is part of it. As much as I get frustrated that we aren't getting these issues resolved, it is something that, as I think listening to Joe and Dick both speak, the history shows that it will eventually resolve itself. It's just a question of how rapidly, I would argue, it needs to be done, especially when it comes to the safety aspect. It needs to get done sooner rather than later. I wonder, guys, if you have any other thoughts when it comes to new fans.
I think he summed it up really well. I think he summed it up well. I think that there's going to have to be some changes made in the name of safety. And I think we've identified the teams that, all the teams I think are going to be working hard over this now gap in April. I think the factories are going to be very busy, all of them. But I think that there are certain factories where the amount of work being put in is probably going to be pretty astronomical, quite frankly. But at least they're not repairing crash damage and preparing cars to go to the next race and that sort of thing. So I think it'll be real interesting to see what turns up in Miami.
I think on the subject of new fans, I think that the new fans have come to Formula One because of things like Drive to Survive. It's the people they're watching, less so than the machinery. I think that's a really important point. But I think that those who are being drawn into it want to understand more about the machinery and the regulations and how it all works. But fundamentally, it's the people and the power of character that has drawn everybody in. So, this is, I think, Formula One's doing fine. I really believe that. And I think that we'll just see those fans maturing, and some will go away for sure, but there'll be new ones coming with the movie and things like that. And also, with Apple TV, with all the different, many different promotions and partnerships going on at the moment, Formula One is growing all the time. So I think it's in a very healthy place. It just needs, as always, there's always a few problems need to be sorted out.
Yeah. Well, on that
Very
note, I say, Dick, go jump in and get to that day job. And Joe, it was
Will
great
do.
catching up with you. And I look forward to our next conversation, gentlemen.
Absolutely. Me too.
Okay, friends, what did you think of this conversation? We'd love to hear from you. What questions are you wrestling with? What should we dive into next? Send them to Sabrina at 2guysagirlandf1.com. We read every single one, and frankly, your questions are usually more interesting than what we've come up with on our own. And with that, let me say, this ends our conversation. But we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.